tired of this shit. An essay on discernment, language, and the future we choose to inherit by Myrtle October. Something about what I'm seeing doesn't sit right with me. I'm tired. Not because racism never existed, not because history doesn't matter, not because I believe America or the world has suddenly become fair, enlightened, or free of discrimination. I'm tired because somewhere along the way, we began calling almost every uncomfortable interaction racism, and I think we may be losing our ability to recognize the real thing. That frustrates me. But frustration is not where I want this conversation to end. It is where my curiosity begins. For months I've watched conversations become shorter while accusations have become larger. People seem increasingly certain they know exactly why another human being said what they said or did what they did. One look, one sentence, one disagreement, one 30-second video, the verdict is already in. Racist. Victim. Colonizer. Bigots. Oppressor. Enemy. That label. Those labels. The labels often arrive long before the questions. That unsettled me. Not because I think racism has disappeared, but because I began wondering what happens to a society when we stop investigating and start assuming. Over the past year, my social media feeds have become saturated with videos in which ordinary disagreements, awkward encounters, traffic stops, workplace tensions, and public misunderstandings are immediately framed as racism. That is my observation, not a scientific study. I know an algorithm is not the whole world. I know videos can be edited, stripped of context, staged, exaggerated, or intentionally designed to provoke emotion. Still, after seeing the same pattern repeatedly, I began asking myself a serious question. Are we becoming less interested in understanding what happened and more interested in assigning the most inflammatory motive possible? If I am wrong, I want evidence that changes my mind. If I am right, then we owe ourselves a more careful conversation than the one we're currently having. Because a society matures when it learns to name its problems accurately. Justice begins with truth. Truth requires discernment. If we truly want a better future, we must become as committed to precision as we are to passion. This article is not an attempt to deny racism. It is not an attempt to erase history. It is not a defense of discrimination, police misconduct, prejudice, institutional inequality, or injustice. It is an invitation to think more carefully about the words we use, the conclusions we reach, and the problems we are actually trying to solve. Precision is not denial. Precision is how serious conversations move forward. Racism is a serious word. That is exactly why I do not want to use it carelessly. There are different definitions of racism. Some people primarily understand it as a systemic power embedded within institutions. Others define it more broadly to include racial prejudice or discrimination between individuals. I am not pretending that debate does not exist. My concern is simpler. If we begin using one word to describe every uncomfortable interaction, action, every disagreement, every rejection, every unfair experience, and every form of human failure, we eventually stop distinguishing between problems that require very different responses. Sometimes an incident may involve racism, sometimes prejudice, sometimes bias, sometimes fear, sometimes ignorance, sometimes poor judgment, sometimes classism, sometimes ethnocentrism, sometimes bad policy, sometimes inadequate training, and sometimes two people misunderstand each other. And sometimes one person is simply behaving badly. Those are not all the same thing. Words matter because solutions depend on accurate diagnosis. You cannot correct poor training with the same tools used to dismantle discriminatory policy. You cannot resolve misunderstanding by treating it as organized racial oppression. You cannot address economic inequality if every disparity is discussed exclusively through race. And you cannot effectively confront racism if the word has been stretched so broadly that it no longer communicates anything specific. The more imprecise our language becomes, the harder it becomes to solve real problems. Perhaps that is what troubles me most. This article is not really about racism. It is about discernment. It is about whether we still possess patience to ask better questions before reaching permanent conclusions. History is real, but history is also complicated. Before anyone decides I'm speaking against black people, let me save you the trouble. I am black. I carry this history too. I have studied it. I have cried over it. Like many people, I've gone down the rabbit hole, reading, watching documentaries, tracing the horrors of slavery, segregation, lynching, Jim Crow, redlining, and the countless ways human beings have justified treating other human beings as less than fully human. History is real. It should never be softened to make anyone comfortable. But history is also complicated. The story of slavery is not a single story with a single villain. It is a history involving African kingdoms and traders and European merchants, colonial governments, plantation owners, financial institutions, lawmakers, and ordinary people who benefited from, resisted, ignored, or challenged the system in different ways. That complexity doesn't diminish the evil of slavery. It reminds us that human beings are capable of building systems of extraordinary cruelty when conscience gives way to power. The lesson I take from history is not that one race is permanently guilty and another is permanently wounded. The lesson is that human beings are capable of both unimaginable cruelty and extraordinary courage. We inherited both possibilities. History should educate us, not imprison us. It should make us cautious about the stories we tell ourselves, because every generation is tempted to believe it is morally superior to the one that came before it. Rarely is that true. The question I keep returning to isn't whether history happened. It did. The question is whether history should become the permanent emotional identity of people who are alive today. I don't want to inherit my ancestors' chains. I want to inherit their courage, their intelligence, their resilience, their adaptability, their faith, their determination to build life under circumstances survive so that I would spend my life in prison by what was done to them. They survived so that I could build upon what they preserved. To me, honoring my ancestors means becoming more free than they were, not remaining emotionally captive to the worst moments of their lives. It should warn us. It should challenge us. It should humble us. But it should never become an excuse to stop imagining a better future. People must be allowed to grow. One of the most troubling ideas I see gaining traction is the belief that people are permanently defined by what their ancestors believed or what members of their group once did. I cannot accept that. Human beings evolve, cultures evolve, families evolve, institutions evolve, sometimes slowly. If I believe black people deserve to be seen as individuals rather than stereotypes, then I must extend that same humanity to everyone else. That doesn't mean pretending history didn't happen. It doesn't mean ignoring power. It doesn't mean excusing injustice. It means refusing to reduce a living human being to a historical category before I've learned anything about their character. No person should be reduced to a historical stereotype before they've had the opportunity to reveal their own character. Just as I refuse to believe every black person is defined by every black ancestor. None of us should be forced to perform a historical role we never auditioned for. Growth is the entire point of civilization. If we don't believe people can change, then what exactly are we working toward? Why educate? Why legislate? Why protest? Why reconcile? Why forgive? And why hope? That belief doesn't erase history. It gives history a purpose. We have our own work to do, black people. This is where some readers may decide to leave me. This is where some listeners on my YouTube may decide to stop listening, unfollow and unsubscribe. I understand that. Self-examination has never been an exciting or beautiful. Self-examination is not easy. It's not as easy as pointing a finger. It is easier to identify someone else's blind spot than to acknowledge our own. But if I'm asking society to become more honest, then I have to begin with myself and with the communities I know best. I cannot ask for intellectual honesty from others while refusing it from my own. We spend enormous amounts of energy examining the failures of other communities. How often do we examine our own? We talk about racism. Do we talk with the same urgency about colorism? Do we talk honestly about the ways we sometimes shame our own children? About the sons we tell to man up before taught to even process grief? About the daughters we expect to carry impossible standards while telling them that their feelings are too much? About the emotional wounds that become generational inheritance because no one stopped long enough to heal them. Sometimes the deepest harm doesn't come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who love us but have never learned another way. That isn't unique to black families. It isn't unique to white families. It isn't unique to any culture. Every community passes down both wisdom and wounds. Every family hands the next generation something beautiful and something unfinished. Every culture has traditions worth preserving. Every culture has habits worth questioning. No one gets a moral exemption. Not black communities, not white communities, not Latino communities, not Asian communities, not religious communities, not spiritual communities, not political movements, not universities, not police departments, not corporations, not families. None of us are above honest reflection. My critique has never been reserved for one race. I'm questioning black communities, white communities, police behavior, citizen behavior, social media, spiritual communities that mistake certainty for wisdom, political movements that profit from outrage, institutions that confuse ideology with truth, and myself. But if I cannot question my own assumptions, I have no business questioning anyone else's. This essay isn't about who's innocent. It's asking something much harder. Who is willing to be honest? Outrage is profitable. Discernment is not. The more I watch social media, the more I notice something unsettling. Outrage spreads faster than understanding. Certainty travels farther than curiosity. Conflicts earn more attention than compassion. The loudest voice often becomes the most trusted voice. Not because it is the wisest, but because it is the easiest to notice. That should concern all of us. Algorithms don't measure truth, they measure attention. Attention has become currency, and courage is one of the internet's most valuable commodities. That doesn't mean every creator is dishonest. Far from it. Many people are using social media to expose genuine injustice, educate others, and build meaningful communities. But the platforms themselves often reward emotional intensity over thoughtful complexity. A 30-second clip rarely contains the whole story. It doesn't show what happened before someone pressed record. It doesn't always show what happened after. It doesn't reveal what was edited out. Yet we're asked to become judge, jury, and moral authority before the video even ends. One person becomes the racist, another becomes the victim, and someone else becomes the colonizer. Another becomes the oppressor. And we assign identities before we gathered facts. And then we wonder why trust is disappearing. False certainty doesn't make us wiser. It makes us easier to manipulate. The more emotionally reactive we become, the less discerning we tend to be. That concerns me far more than whether someone wins the latest argument online. Because when a society loses its ability to distinguish evidence from assumption, context from conclusion, and disagreement from dehumanization, everyone eventually pays the price. Leadership begins with self-governance. The older I get, the less interested I become in controlling other people. I am far more interested in learning to govern myself. In fact, I've had to learn to reparent myself, especially when I'm in a line or at Walmart. That may sound unrelated to racism. I don't think it is. Every meaningful movement is history, eventually asking the questions, the same questions. What kind of human being are we becoming? Not what someone else is becoming. Not whether your political opponents have changed. Not whether another race has evolved enough. You. Can you regulate your emotions before they regulate you? Can you distinguish evidence from assumption? Can you disagree without dehumanizing? Can you hold conviction without becoming captive to certainty? These questions, they matter. Because every society is built from individuals. Institutions don't become ethical on their own, people do. Communities don't become trustworthy by accident, people make them trustworthy. Justice isn't sustained merely because laws exist. It survives because ordinary people decide that integrity matters more than winning. Leadership then begins long before someone holds public office. It begins in quiet places, in conversations no one records, in moments when no audience is watching, and the decisions to seek audience understanding before judgments. That kind of leadership doesn't go viral, but it changes families, communities, and eventually nations. Perhaps that is the kind of leadership we need most. What kind of ancestor do you intend to be? One of the unexpected gifts of studying history is realizing that every generation believes it is standing at the center of the story. Perhaps we aren't. Perhaps we are simply another chapter. We spend a great deal of time talking about our ancestors, who they were, what they endured, what they built, what they destroyed, and what they passed on. Those conversations matter. But lately, I've found myself asking different questions. What will our descendants say about us? One day, if humanity continues, someone will study this. Generations the same way we studied those that came before us. They will examine our speeches, our laws, our technology, our social media posts, our fears, our movements, our silences, our failures, our triumphs. What story will they tell? Will they say we inherited pain and transformation? Did we transform pain into wisdom? Or will they say we inherited pain and multiplied it? Will they remember us as the generation that learned to speak across differences? Or the generation that became addicted to outrage? What will they say? Will they say we defended justice? Or that we confused certainty with truth? Will they admire our courage? Or question why we became so comfortable reducing complex human beings into simple labels? History is not only something we inherit. History is something we create. Every conversation, every institution, every law, every relationship, every child we raise, every stranger we choose to understand instead of condemn, those become tomorrow's history. That realization has changed the way I think about responsibility. I no longer ask only whether I am right. I ask whether I am leaving something worth inheriting. Am I creating more clarity than confusion? More courage than fear? More understanding than division? More truth than performance? Legacy is rarely built through dramatic moments. It is built through ordinary decisions repeated over time. The decision to tell the truth when it would be easier to perform certainty. The decision to ask another question before making another accusation. The decision to listen before responding. The decision to protect another person's humanity even while holding them accountable. Perhaps that is what maturity looks like. Not agreement, but discernment. Not perfection, but humility. Not forgetting history, but refusing to become imprisoned by it. I hope the people who come after us inherit more than our grievances. I hope they inherit our wisdom. I hope they inherit our discipline. I hope they inherit our willingness to question ourselves before questioning anyone else. Most of all, I hope they inherit a language that still has the precision to tell the difference between injustice, misunderstanding, prejudice, ignorance, cruelty, and genuine racism. Because if we lose that language, we don't simply lose arguments. We lose one of the most important tools the free society has for pursuing justice. I don't expect this essay to settle the debate. I only hope it raises the quality of the conversation. And a final thought, perhaps I am wrong about some of this. I hope I remain open enough to discover where. That is the responsibility of every thinking person, not to become certain, but to remain teachable. I don't expect everyone to agree with me. Agreement has never been the purpose of writing. Understanding is. If this essay doesn't do anything, if it does nothing more than provide courage to one person or allows one person to pause before assigning another person's motives, if it encourages one difficult conversation to begin with curiosity instead of uncertainty, if it reminds someone that precision is an act of respect, then it has done its work. I still believe racism exists. I still believe injustice exists. I still believe prejudice, discrimination, and unequal treatment deserve to be confronted wherever they appear, under any circumstance, not just between blacks and whites. But I also believe discernment deserves our protection, because discernment is what allows us to tell the difference. Without it, justice becomes reaction, history becomes identity, language becomes performance, and outrage becomes our only vocabulary. I want something better than that. I want a society that can hold two truths at once, that remembers history without becoming imprisoned by it, that confirms injustice without manufacturing enemies, that values evidence more than assumption, that chooses understanding before accusation whenever understanding is still possible. Perhaps my greatest fear isn't that we will fail to recognize racism. My greatest fear is that we will become so careless with our language that when genuine racism appears, we will no longer possess the words or the wisdom to recognize it. History should educate us, not imprison us. It should warn us. It should challenge us. It should humble us. But it should never become an excuse to stop imagining a better future. Truth should refine us. And wisdom? Wisdom should make us slower to condemn and quicker to understand. That is the future I hope we choose to build. And before we leave each other, if you've listened or read this far, thank you. You may disagree with me. You may disagree with parts of me. That's all right. The purpose of an essay isn't to end a conversation. It's to begin one. If this essay encourages us to ask one better question, to delay one unfair judgment, to replace one assumption with one act of curiosity, then perhaps we've already moved a little closer to the future. I hope we leave behind not a perfect future, simply a wiser one.